Okay, we're live now.
Yeah. All right. I'm told we're live. Welcome back. Better late than never. Maybe. So a very simple way to look at all this, probably the simplest way to look at it, is simply as a reality check. What is your experience really? What are you actually really experiencing in the moment? It's really that simple. And if you take the trouble to look, you'll notice that it's a lot more complex than our narration of what we're experiencing, what we're doing, usually.
You mentioned earlier about the effect of sort of sharp descriptive things. Can you talk more about that?
Well, they can't be said, but I think typically it's easy for people to have the idea, the fantasy that, well, it would be nice if everything always went smoothly and everything worked out. And of course, in the real world, that doesn't actually seem to happen very, very much. And it can be easy to think, oh, this is a big problem. Things shouldn't have been like this. This is a disaster. Things are, not working out or whatever. But in actual fact, these are wonderful opportunities because it's a kind of a reality check of noticing, wow, perhaps my delightful rosy Disney World view of things isn't actually very real, is it?
But what effect does it have sort of at a ground level? Sort of shaking things up and promoting you to look in a different direction, or what is that?
Sure. Well, I mean, any kind of a disruption is, takes to some degree will take you out of your normalcy, take you out of your comfort zone, let's say, to some degree perhaps. And this is any time you're outside of your normalcy, this is a wonderful opportunity because you look around and you notice, wow, there's life after life. There's more here going on than I'm used to thinking. Which of course is the whole point to notice, the whole point to flirt with. To any degree, that's a plus. Our enemy, if anything, is our normalcy, our familiarity that we think is important and we maintain and we get very defensive of, perhaps. But actually, that normalcy is, if anything, the prison that we build ourselves into in our imagination. We're discovering that the actual normalcy is not a normalcy, or there's not, let's say, a constancy in circumstantial sense, is wonderful because then you have the opportunity to discover the actual normalcy, which is much more reliable and trustworthy than our imagined normalcy, which will inevitably let us down sooner or later.
Well, I could see how that would be true if I was going on a trip and I'm outside of my normalcy on this travel trip. But if something, as you say, goes wrong, a lot more presence is required to not go into, whatever I go into.
Well, whatever you go into it, and how much good does that do? Say your house burns down and you get diagnosed with cancer or something like that. It's like, whoa, hold the phone. This is different. Now what? And there will be a now what? There will be a now what. The fantasy is, oh no, my world's ended or whatever, right? But it doesn't actually. It's actually, well, things happen. It continues on and it's different, but it's kind of the same. And I mean, but we discovered that structures that we relate to and imagine as necessary or precious or important are actually, crutches and little training wheels that we use to make our world smaller. or in effect has that effect to some degree perhaps.
So the now what is helpful.
Sure. Always.
Seems like the mind just needs something to grasp onto to.
The mind will try to grasp onto something, but there is nothing for it to grasp onto in reality. And the biggest favor you can do yourself is let yourself discover that fact. It's easy to, when something is stripped away from you, it's easy to grasp onto something else. But you're not doing yourself any favors by doing so.
So even hearing the now what, which to me could be like a pointer.
But it's more than a pointer, it's reality itself. I mean, your world falls apart and there you're sitting there and yet your world doesn't fall apart. And that's the now what.
Oh, okay.
Life goes on. Anyway, the interesting dichotomy here, as you're probably noticing in this discussion today, is between interpretive frameworks, what we imagine to be going on, or what we imagine things to be, versus what they actually are. And how the discovery of what they actually are is always a win, always a gain, always an expansion. And the way we think things to be is always a limitation, always a closing, always a smallness, always has downside implications that are generally not as good as we hope they would be. And then the trick is to play with this, explore it, look at your experience and notice the ways in which your experience is intrinsically and in the moment already beyond what you're used to thinking of it as being. And that right there is just an easy and accessible point of access to this, the obvious fact that this is more and bigger than we're used to thinking it is.
So as I was walking back here by myself, I was kind of enjoying the noticing, just noticing. And then the mind went to, what about thought? Peter thinking as he was walking back to this place. I mean, I see how it can be turned into the enemy, but what is a relationship with thought?
Just presence. It's in relationship with everything. All energy conditions are just present if they are. And in a way, and to the extent they are. When thought is present, thought is present. But when thought is present, vision is also present, touch is also present, sound is also present, various other experiential characteristics are present that may be less characterizable. Everything is just present and nothing has priority. It coexists. The focus of attention has a tendency to dance around from one thing to another and sort of make it seem to come to the forefront. But just because something seems to come to the forefront because the focus of attention is lighted on it, doesn't negate everything that the focus of attention doesn't happen to be lighting on, and doesn't render what is in focus any more important and what's out of focus or seems less present, less in the forefront, any less important.
That's amazing.
No, it's self-evident. I mean, just look at your experience. Your experience is always full. Whether you're noticing or not, it's always full. Your field of vision is always full. Whether you're paying, you can be lost in thought, but your field of vision is still full. And you're actually experiencing that fullness, even if you're not, being aware of it. and you can, that being the case, you can let yourself notice that, notice the way that's, I mean, that's part of the tyranny of the conscious mind, is that it believes in its own PR of focus. If it's focused on something that seems to be, having priority, then it thinks it does have priority, but that's an absurdity.
Wow.
Is it a problem with the mind too, that you identify with it, that you think you are the source, or that you are the one who is thinking those
Sure.
thoughts?
Well, it's not a problem so much, but it's inaccurate. And of course, you can look and discover that the way that thought just appears, the way everything appears. Thought appears spontaneously, the way light appears spontaneously. And I'm not doing my thought any more than I'm doing the light. It's just present. It's a present characteristic. And again, one can look for oneself and just see the way in which that's done. How is the light appearing? Can I stop it? Can I start it? How is thought appearing? Can I stop it? Can I start it? It's a similar phenomenon, just sort of a different bandwidth or a different experiential texture. The same with all of the sort of bandwidths of experience, where you have light and sound and touch and smell and taste and thought, and then all kinds of other subtle experiential qualities that we don't generally qualify. We don't have language for. But all of these different textures of experience are always present, and they appear spontaneously. And even as they appear, we use this word appear, but what does that mean? When you look at what appearing is, it's a very, very strange phenomenon. And again, all of this is obvious and intimately available if one takes the trouble just to look. How does thought appear? Where's thought coming from? Am I actually doing thought?
That's what most people think.
Yeah, sure, perhaps. Yeah, people think all kinds of things. But
Yeah,
a simple rule of thumb is anything that is thinkable is not true.
Yeah.
It cannot be true, simply because the way things are is too subtle and complex to be thinkable. You can't think it is this or it is that, it happens this way or it happens that way. That's always an oversimplification.
Yeah.
Because if you look at any experiential phenomenon, it's too subtle, it's too weird. How does experience appear? I mean, does it even appear? What does that even mean? I mean, it's like a koan. You look at that, it's no answer to that question. And yet here it is. And it's not like you need to get lost in all of these profundities. You can go about your business and watch a TV show you like, or have a beer, or argue with your spouse, or whatever it is you do. And that's it too. It doesn't need to be special to be special. It doesn't need to not be normal to not be normal. Because you can't get away from what this is. This is what it is, whatever you think it is or not, and whatever you're doing or not. So it's not a matter of, oh, I need to, behave preciously. I need to speak less. I need to wear a loincloth and meditate or something. It's like, no, who gives a shit? Do whatever you like, because that doesn't affect it. That doesn't affect what this is, what you do or don't do. It's not a matter of our personal orientation or action or anything. It's a matter of what that is. What's that made of? Okay, here I am. Here's my life. I'm doing my thing, whatever that happens to be. But what is all that made of? How's that even here? And that's the really interesting question. But that comes with, regardless of what you're doing or not doing. So all of this spirituality is a red herring. The way most people use it, the way it's normally approached as sort of a lifestyle or something you're supposed to spend a lot of time with or something. It's just a red herring. It's just more narcissistic self-involvement, self-importance. Oh, I'm being spiritual. Just like, hey, what's going on here is amazing, and that's pretty obvious to anyone that just takes a look at it. And that's the whole shooting match of what spirituality is in a nutshell. And then all the details just comes with if you're temperamentally interested in following all that kind of stuff up, you can do so.
that would be kind of fun to play with. Thoughts are going on, and then just bring my equal awareness to the sounds. Bring my equal awareness to what I'm seeing.
Sure. You can bring your awareness, and you can not bring your awareness, and notice how when you're not bringing the awareness, it's actually nothing's changed.
Well, if I'm not bringing my awareness up, I'm usually lost in something. Or
But you may think you're lost, but are you really? Do you actually go somewhere?
okay.
Or is it a pretense of being lost?
Well, I would say distracted, focusing on something, making a sandwich.
Well, this whole very weird phenomena of focus is really worth giving some attention to. Notice how it does, how it works. Focus is always sort of dancing around or drifting around, and at all different kinds of frequencies simultaneously. So, like if you look very closely at your visual attention, for example, say you're looking at someone's face, you'll notice your attention is actually dancing around. You don't actually look at their face just sort of like this. If you did that, after about 2 seconds, their face would disappear. Your eye actually is dancing around, and that's what sort of stabilizes it. Try that sometime. Look at your face in the mirror, or someone else's face if you have an obliging partner, and just absolutely try and look without shifting your gaze the tiniest bit. And you'll notice in just a couple of seconds, you almost can't see anything. Whereas in normalcy, what our eyes are doing is dancing around, and that creates a fuller image and typically the awareness ignores the dancing and just holds it as being just a stability that's there. But that's not really how the mechanism works if you look closely. And there's all sorts of, so that's a sort of a relatively rapid degree of dancing around. But focus also sort of moves more ponderously at the same time, where you sort of with this and with this and with this and think of that. But then there's also little fast move. So it's a multitasking. It's a very strange multidimensional sort of a phenomenon. But one of the really interesting and powerful aspects about focus is just because an aspect of an experiential field is, say you feel the vision. Like right now you're looking at my face, so the wall over there is not particularly, it's sort of blurry or barely there maybe, but my face is sort of bright and sharp or whatever. But the face, just because the face is sharp, it's not actually more present. And just because the wall is blurry, it's not actually less present. It's equally present as a blurriness, and this is equally present as a sharpness for the gradation there. So again, focus sort of creates the illusion of bringing something to the forefront, but it doesn't. But that's not what actually happens. Everything is always equally present. Anyway, the point isn't to sort of make a catalog of all these things. The point is to play with it for yourself and just notice the way in which these things are subtle and very interesting and not the way we're used to thinking of things.
Do you notice, I don't know how to say it exactly, growing or an evolution in your own consciousness or the way you experience?
Yes and no. Yes and no. I think that its very nature is to continually deepen with itself, but at the same time, it doesn't really change, and that's very paradoxical. But so, I think that's the natural tendency of this. I think the natural tendency of this that we call experience, it tends to become more subtle and move more deeply into itself. But what it is isn't actually changing or improving because of that. It's just sort of a deeper being with itself, and perhaps a deeper kind of a context or whatever, without necessarily actually being deeper. I think it's very paradoxical. But I think what we interpret as being the flow of time is just an example of this phenomenon. You know, where we age, we seem to be accumulating experience, accumulating history, maturing, learning. All of these phenomena are all a kind of you know, harmonics of this fundamental tendency of this to move into itself more, you know, a little more engagedly or deeply somehow. You know, whatever that means. But you know, it's very interesting to look at. I mean, in a way, all this stuff that I'm calling this yoga is simply a way of trying to maximize the efficiency of that process by attending to it a little more. I think even if we approach our lives very glibly and carelessly and just live a, you know, a very careless life of you know, of normalcy and watch TV and drink beer and, you know, whatever, I think that still is the tendency that just moves into itself more subtly. But I think that if one attends to it, perhaps with intelligence and with intimacy and engagement, that may possibly tend to maximize the efficiency of that motion, and then it can kick into it's more explicit sort of unfoldment, or more obvious kind of a development. But I think experience itself is naturally this kind of development. I think it's impossible for that not to happen, even if it seems to be not happening. You see someone that's just living a horrible life, and they seem to have been living a horrible life their whole lives. But even there is a, you know, there's an arc. There's some degree of unfoldment.
Could you talk about, you mentioned time, in itself is also an illusion.
Well, time is a very strange phenomenon. It's not simple. You know, we tend to think of time in a simple way, perhaps. You know, as well as there's the past that stretches back forever with history, and all the past in the universe behind it, which will somehow become the present and then become the past, and all. We think, you know, think of this sort of linear time. But if you look at time, of course, only the present moment exists, and so you can't actually find the past except as an aspect of the present moment. Well, maybe memory, but it's subtle. It's very strange, because in the present moment we can observe transition, even though the present moment is instantaneous. Nonetheless, somehow we observe transition. You know, if there's movement, we observe the movement, which happens now, and yet also it seems to include aspects of memory, you know, aspects of anticipation, and it's all very murky in terms of how it actually works.
Is it, you could compare it to a movie. It has the illusion of motion, but in fact it's separate pictures flashing.
Well, it might
create
the
illusion of a movement.
It might be like that. It might be like that, but perhaps it's not. Perhaps it's more subtle. You know, to my observation, looking at time, again, what I discover is that it's not resolvable. It's not. You can't pin it down. Now I get it exactly this way. It's not. There's lots of ways it can seem to be various ways, and then I look more closely at it, and it's, you know, it sort of, one can look at it very, very intimately and discover very obviously that it's subtler than we're used to thinking. But to pin down exactly how it is and what it is an impossibility. But that's the same way with everything. You know, the fundamental characteristic of this to investigation is just unresolvable. You can't ever get to the bottom of precisely what anything is, even as it is precisely what it is. So it's very paradoxical. It's very slippery. We were talking about something lightly over lunch. How generalization is the basic mechanism of delusion, of confusion, and the specific, the precision and specific is the revelation of transcendence and the revelation of liberation, of actuality. And this time is a very good example. The more generally you think about it, it's easy to think of it as being something and assume that it is that, and then it sort of becomes frozen as being that in your imagination. But then when you look, time is is right here. It's specific. It's an actuality, whatever it is, and so it can be examined very closely, very precisely. And in this examination disproves and invalidates all of these clumsy, more generalized ways we hold it to be. And we discover, no, it's more subtle than that. It's very interesting. It's more subtle. And yet, but its actualness right here. And again, the more specifically we look at it, the more amazing we discover it is. Even if we can't ever get to the end of the investigation, it still is a continual revelation of more and more subtlety, which invalidates the less subtle generalizations. So we develop our own skillfulness of being able to be with ambiguous precision. But it's a very strange aspect of actuality is that it is specific and precise, but it's not resolvable. Physicists were pulling their hair out about this when they discovered quantum phenomena, because the closer they looked at things, they didn't actually come into focus any sharper. It was still fuzzy. They looked even closer and it's still fuzzy. So it was like, wow, that's not supposed to be like that. The closer it's supposed to get sharper. But it's not like that. And, we find that experientially, if you look not just on a micro level or, a level of physics or something like that, but every experiential phenomena is exactly like that. If you look at it closely, the closer you look, the more specifics you discover, but the specifics don't actually come in focus. They're specific, and they're in a way they're more precisely, detailed, but it's still not resolvable. And you look even closer, and this just continues forever. You keep getting, wow, more and more detail, more and more specifics, but I still don't know what the hell it is. And this is the very nature of what this is. It's a very strange condition. Because it's counter to human logic. Human logic is, well, if you investigate enough, you actually discover something. And if you investigate this, it invalidates a lot of error, which is the advantage of doing it, but you don't ever actually discover anything. I mean, you discover a mystery. You discover that there's nothing to discover, which is a very weird thing to discover, especially since you discover it as a certainty. The certainty of unresolvability. I found out what this is, and that what it is it can't be found out what it is. And it certainly is that. I mean, that's bizarre. It sounds like a riddle, it sounds like a game of sophistry, but it's actually like that.
Then you have the problem that the observer has an impact of what you are observing. So you never know.
Of course.
It's the whole.
It's all the fantasy of that there's an observer separate from an observed is an absurdity. It's one. Anywhere you look, you can look at an observer, weighted observation, or you can look at an observed weighted observation, but there's no actual division. It's not like, okay, that's observed, not observer, and this is observer, not observed. It's not like that. It's a continuum. So again, all these generalized ways of approaching it turn out to be too heavy-handed. But it's very easy. You don't need to try and make sense of it or wrestle with the subtleties. You just feel it. You just relax and feel it, and all that comes with. All the subtlety comes with, without needing to work or strain or or retain anything or even see anything. Just relax and feel it, and it's just bang. All of that just comes with, and it's completely obvious. I mean, that's the wonderful, the lazy man's dream of what this turns out to be, that it does the work. It has the intelligence. I don't need to muster up intelligence to see how subtle it is. It already is that, and it already does that. So just by feeling it, the intelligence comes with, and it bootstraps itself up into observability, into perceivability just by presence, because it is that. So, you know, which is delightful for those of us that are lazy.
So I'm watching Nova on TV, Science Channel, whatever. And I'm hearing that the Earth is about 8 billion years old or whatever. There's other galaxies out there. And now what's one to, what is one to make of that?
What do you make of anything?
Well, it's not my direct experience.
Well, but if it is the case, then it is your direct experience. In other words, if there are galaxies out there, then this is what those other galaxies out there look like. Where does out there begin? This is out there. You're in deep space, dear.
This is where I go. I have problems.
This is what deep space looks like from your vantage point.
From my vantage point. Oh.
Sure. And your vantage point, as far as you know, is the only vantage point.
Yes. And so then there is no, so then there would appear to be no other galaxy.
No, it's not negated. It just means the way the other galaxies are appearing is as this. You know, what does New York look like? To you, right now, New York looks like this. To the extent New York is in actuality, this must be it, because this is the actuality, right? So New York may be here. You know, there may be gravitational perturbations in the trajectories of the subatomic particles because of the presence of the mass that's in New York in the gravitational field of the Earth or space-time or something. Who knows? Whatever, right? But New York is here. New York is here as much as it can be. Galaxies are here, you know. Actually, you can feel galaxies here.
Mm-hmm. Tell me what you mean.
Well,
Hey, what else?
it's not particularly important, but it's true. You can look it up. You ever heard of a Foucault's pendulum? A Foucault pendulum.
Foucault.
Yeah. If you take a very heavy pendulum and let it swing from a relatively frictionless bearing, this pendulum will swing back and forth more or less indefinitely, right? But a very curious thing happens. If you watch the pendulum for 24 hours, the pendulum moves like this, and moves like a clock, and moves, the angle of the plane of the swing goes through a complete circle every 24 hours.
Wow.
And that's because of the gravity of the galaxies.
Oh, you just had to show.
No, it literally is because of that, as far as anyone can tell.
Not the Earth rotation?
Well, it's because of the Earth's rotation, but the Earth's rotation relative to the other galaxies. Here's a thought experiment. It's suppose there are no other galaxies, how could you tell if the Earth was rotating or not? Because there's nothing for it to be rotating relative to. So the Earth is rotating relative to the inertial framework of all the gravitational field of all the galaxies.
Or just relative to the inertia of the pendulum?
Yeah, but the inertia is relative to the galaxies. There would be no external gravitational field for the pendulum. In other words, suppose you lived in a universe where there was only one planet. What would it mean for it to be rotating? Or not? You wouldn't know if it was rotating. It would be meaningless for it to be rotating. Earth is rotating, everything else isn't. Or you can say, actually the Earth is stationary and the entire universe rotates around the Earth. How can you tell the difference? You say, oh no, that's unlikely. Who knows? Maybe it just happens to be like that. Maybe the Earth is the fixed spot in the universe and everything's moving, the entire universe moves around the Earth once every 24 hours. Right?
That's what I believed in the Middle Ages.
Sure, why not? Oh, but that's not true. We know better now. They thought the Earth was flat. But we think there's space and time and things. And now physicists are ripping that away.
So what about the age of the Earth, 8 billion, whatever the number is?
And there's no problem with that. If the Earth is 8 billion years old, what that is right now. This is 8 billion years old.
Oh,
This is what 8 billion years old looks like. There's only, the only reality is actuality, and the only actuality is this here now. It's that simple. And so any reality is real in the way it's real this here now. So if you want to find what it means that the Earth is however many billion years old, you have to look in this here now. And that's what it means. So dinosaurs roamed the Earth, 125 million years ago or whenever. And what does that look like now? It looks like fossil rocks. Maybe if there were fossil rocks here. Or whatever. But it's easy to imagine that there isn't actually an extended time and the history is kind of out there somewhere. There's some then that's a real then. But there are no thens. The then is a theory, then is a hypothesis.
exactly.
There's only now, and so if you're looking for then, you have to look now, because where else are you going to look for it? You can't, there's no other time to look for it. We have all of these theories of entities that we suppose exist. Time exists, history exists, the past exists, the future exists, 8 billion years ago exists. Those are hypotheses, and the only evidence you have is now. And just because you can erect an explanation based upon, like what modern materialistic science does, you can erect other hypotheses that also explain in radically different ways. They could completely and utterly contradict the modern materialistic theories. And they're all just hypotheses. They're all hot air that we can entertain here and now, which is the powerful fact. And the only thing that exists is your experiential field, as far as you know. Period. That's not theory, it's empirical, it's really obvious. And then it may be that other experiential fields exist and so on and so forth, or not. That's in the realm of hypothesis, so it's irrelevant.
There's a sharing that does happen, that
Yes.
seems to, in a dialectical,
Sure.
there seems to be something that both souls commune in such a way that they could say they're actually sharing something similar.
If that can be said, but your only experience of that is your side of it.
Yes.
For example, you can have an experience like that in a dream. It can apparently be a very profound sharing with someone in the dream that you're having a deep intimacy with. And you wake up and, where were they? Who are they? What was there? So
Yeah,
just
someone
because
could say-
there's an experience, you can't draw conclusions about it. You can't draw hard and fast. You can have hypotheses. You can say, yeah, maybe the other person was there, maybe there was a sharing. What you can say with certainty is, I experienced it as a very meaningful, energy flurry that I'm calling a sharing. And it felt as if there was another entity there, and that was the result of a catalytic exchange between there. But all you can really say is it felt like that, and maybe it was that, but you experienced it as being that. So that's just kind of a reality check. It doesn't invalidate that, but it certainly doesn't invalidate the value of it. But the actuality of that value is in your experience of it. If it happened and you didn't experience it, what good is it to you?
And the conjoined
There's no conjoined.
experience of communion.
There's no conjoined. I may be experiencing a profound intimacy with you, and you may be experiencing profound intimacy with me, but they're happening in two separate universes.
Hmm.
And we can't even know
There
whether
can't be two separate universes, there's only one
only one what?
universe.
Yeah, you, as far as you know.
Could you expand?
How many observers are there of your experience? Yeah. So, and how many other observers do you have direct experience of? Not inference or hypothesis. You've only ever known one experiencer. The experiencer you think of as you. So as far as you're aware, as far as you can state with certainty, you only know that there's one experience. There's one
But I
experience.
can't deny that I've had experiences that feel like
Right.
communion
Absolutely.
with another human being.
Well, yeah, but you said feel like, and that's what you're saying. That's just the way you're parsing it. And that, again, it doesn't invalidate the experience, and it doesn't even say that it didn't actually happen as a communion. It just says that that's still in the realm of hypothesis. You can't know what it was. You can know it was meaningful,
Yes.
but the meaningfulness is that it appeared to you the way that it did meaningfully.
Yes.
You could have had the same communion with the sky or with a rock that you may think of as being inanimate, and in actuality the rock may be animate, but you're thinking of it as inanimate. That doesn't make it animate or inanimate just because you think of it that way, and that doesn't make the other person you're having the communion with actual or not actual just because you're thinking of them that way. So things are what they are, and that doesn't invalidate the value of them as mediums for profundity, mediums for meaningfulness. But theories about what it is, you want to be careful about what's the hypothesis and what's the actuality. And the actuality is always going to be experiential presence, which is always going to be your experience for you. You can't get direct access to another person's experience. Even if you did, even if you could see through my eyes, then that would just be your experience, right?
So it's a seeming, is that what you're describing?
Sure.
Or it's a seeming?
Sure. It seems as if we're having communication, it seems as if we're having a sharing. But it's not important to interpret it that way, because the meaningfulness doesn't lie in whether or not it actually is that. The meaningfulness lies in the quality of the energy experience.
Of the,
Always. Who else is there?
What meaningfulness?
Any meaningfulness. And what meaningfulness is in itself an interesting comment. What is meaningfulness? What is value? What is beauty? What is intelligence? What is profundity?
We're
I mean-
at the same spot.
Yeah, you can never answer those questions, but that doesn't negate them. On the contrary, that validates them as windows into astounding profundity and revelation.
Not answerable, but when
No, sure. But anything actual will reveal itself as not answerable. I mean, not answerable is the hallmark of real. Anything you can get an answer at, it's a fantasy. Well, I'm oversimplifying.
So am I understanding you correctly if I say, it is not the case that communion did not happen.
Right.
It's just that any description of communion would be so partial as to not be true.
It's not partial, it's just subjective. Because you're the only witness of your side of it. you might be with someone and say, gosh, I feel like we had a profound communion. They might say, what are you talking about? That doesn't negate the profundity for you. And that exact transaction might happen, and then you might wake up and realize you were dreaming and they weren't there anyway. And that doesn't negate the profundity either. I mean, we may die and we discover that we've been basically dreaming and visualizing this entire experience of our lives. And this incredible, I mean, who knows, right? No one knows the context of it. There's no way to know what this is. The only thing you can know is that it seems to be present in the way it seems to be present. But we can't, everything about what it is and how it works and whether it's really there and the way in which it's really there and all of that is conjecture, it's hypothesis. And that doesn't invalidate it. That doesn't mean the hypothesis is valueless necessarily or useless. But it is hypothesis. And if you don't distinguish between hypothesis and actuality, that's the hallmark of insanity, by my definition. If you go about believing things that you think might be true, all of a sudden you're following some savior or a member of some cult and taking the pink Kool-Aid or something.
I think there must be something where you start not like it.
Well, that's always a good sign. If you don't feel threatened or at least bothered,
Shook up.
Shook up, then it's too safe. It should be provocative. Let's put it that way.
But how does that fit into we are one?
We are one, and I'm it. And if you exist, we are one, and you're it. We can speculate that if we each exist, we are the same thing and we exist in the same way. And what exists is inconceivable transcendental actuality. And so if we all exist, we are all inconceivable transcendental actuality. And so in that sense, we are one. But all that speculation. Because again, the inconceivable transcendental actuality is right here, right now, and it's my experience, as far as I know. And maybe your experience too. If you exist, it certainly is your experience. But that's your problem. I mean, these kinds of discussions end up being like how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, because it's just not verifiable, it's speculation. We can't know if each other exists. And that doesn't invalidate it. That doesn't mean that we don't. It just means it's an open question. It's not, and to assume it's being answered or to assume it's a certainty when it isn't is to jump into, being clumsy, being simple with something that's more subtle than that.
How about that it actually really is, but there are just not enough definitions to do it?
It really is what?
Reality, that there isn't, well, there cannot be one conclusive definition to it, because there are so many perspectives and things. But I mean, how about, and that's what every religion says at its core, that it's empty or something like this. Isn't this possibly just a lack of a coherent definition that everybody could kind of chip in? Well, this does not exist, of course, but this must not necessarily defy the fact that actually things are a reality beyond our grasp.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
There's just not a way to capture it.
Oh, absolutely.
It is.
Oh yeah, this is real. This is reality for sure.
Yes.
And it is undefinable. It's the term I like to use is unresolvable.
Yeah.
Because it can't be resolved as being a certain way, as being this or being that. You can't get to the bottom of it. But that doesn't negate it. That just means that it's infinitely subtle and infinitely transcendental. But that it's subtle and transcendental doesn't mean it's beyond us. That subtlety and transcendental is actually available and it's concrete. It's available in most immediacy. So the fact that you can't get to the end of it doesn't mean you can't get to it, because it isn't just at its end, it's at every step of the way it is that. In other words, its transcendental nature is in its most obviousness, and if you look at it closely, you find out how weird it is. But it's not weird even if you don't look at it closely. I didn't put that right on. Well, it's impossible to put well, so that's my excuse. Should we take a little 5-minute break? I can't, what time? We need to knock off like about 3:30, I think. Right, Leif?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have about, it's 10 of 3 now. Why don't we knock off for 5 minutes just to, because this stuff can be numbing in a long stretch. You know, get up and walk in a circle or something, and we'll come back in just about 5 minutes so we can get another half hour or so, if you like.
Yeah, I know, I wanted to too.
Will you have time after this to play with this, or should we do it another time?
You can do it now, but I think we should put the room together.
Yeah.
So if you don't mind hanging around.
I'm not in a hurry.
Okay, when we finish that, then we can
Yeah,
go do
I
that.
can copy that. I just didn't know if you don't chat.
So let's see, wait a second now, maybe this is not a good time because maybe it's gonna take that with me, and then we won't have internet connection, so we better go do it. It'll be under the internet. This is his hotspot.
Oh, I see.
Good thing you had it, because otherwise we wouldn't have internet connection.
We're good?
Yeah.
So
We're good.
can I bring it to your place?
Yeah, we'll just bring it over there. Maybe if you can't come and go, meet me over there at noon.
Oh,
And we'll just do it then.
oh, at the place?
Yeah.
And bring my computer?
Did you get your discovery? Yeah. No, because it's only child. Yeah, that's fine. No. Yeah. Good. One more cup out of it. Good.
We're good.
I gotta tell you that so why does it show that? I think I did the same mistake with documents.
Yeah.
But then they would see the next thing.
Yeah.
I don't know. I wonder why it doesn't show it. Correct.
Maybe there's a way to actually switch that around.
And also, kind of asking the library, Richard at one point started saying, like, here, and talk about religion and and all of that is true, but again, it is what it happens. It's vague, it's just obscure. Right.
I'm pretty sure
The application is Google Plus Hangouts. Built into YouTube to reset the YouTube.
I'll take it to 3:30, maybe a little later. Slow down a little less. How operatic. Feeling empowered. I ring a bell and nothing happens.
maybe it's not really well.
I know.
All right, we're back. I'm here for another half hour, maybe a little bit more, and we have to leave to catch a flight. And so this is it. This is a big moment. So if you have a problem or curiosity about any aspect of this you haven't brought up and you're interested in doing so, please feel free. Or if any of this is bothering you or you disagree with it or you have questions about it, please by all means, bring it up and we can chat about it and look at it. Or whatever.
Really, how can you can't really know anything. It's all completely happening on many levels. All you can do
Right.
is be here.
Yeah, you can't know it, but you don't need to know it because you are it.
Yeah.
This is it, and this is it, and it's already happening, and you're already doing it, and that's the whole shooting match. And so all this knowing or not is just value added. It doesn't actually contribute to anything because the everything is already ongoing, self-sufficient, they're doing itself, and that's not going to change. But noticing that fact can be delightful. And not noticing it can be possibly not less delightful unless you like it. I mean, all this spirituality stuff it's not like there's anything to be gained by taking the trouble to look into this. Because the condition will not be any different than it has ever been. But you may have access to being able to enjoy it in ways that are much more open-ended and delightful and luscious than you may have access to if you're holding it in more simple, simplistic ways.
There is that urge always, it seems like that. I feel like I do see, I feel what you say, that I see it, but then there's always that part of the mind that wants to make sure that it can hold it and capture it so that it doesn't leave.
Sure, that's a fantasy. But that's a misunderstanding because you're not seeing it clearly enough to see that it's something that doesn't need to be held because it can't ever leave. It's what there is. How can what there is go? You don't need to hold on to being. Being couldn't go if it wanted to. And that's the only thing you actually have. Anything you could hold on to, you don't really have. Yeah, okay.
No, I just, that's how my mind goes, it collides.
Sure. Yeah, the mind can't pull this together. But it doesn't need to. It's really more about, I mean, what this is really about is settling into it like you're leaning back into a nice warm hot tub. That's what it's like. That's what reality is. Reality is like a warm, luscious, full hot tub. It's not about making sense of it or analyzing it. It's about just enjoying the lusciousness of it.
I think what you said about letting go of the unreality is much more difficult. It's just that, that's the part that.
Yeah, the way human psychology seems to work, we seem to have a lot of investment in our status of defining ourselves and defining everything. We seem to hold that as precious and important, and we can even feel very threatened if that seems to be challenged. But all of this holding and defining actually is we're depriving ourselves of something that's much more wonderful than that. But it can be very difficult to let go of that because we have long habit and we seem to have some kind of a deep internal motivation to approach things in that mode of defining, owning them, claiming we have a handle on things. As if that's ever going to happen.
So you just mentioned we think we have a handle or that we are doing anything. In fact, we are just observing.
Sure, whatever. I mean, you can't even say it's just observing it. Whatever it is, it's beyond being a simple condition of this, that, this, or that. You can't say what it is. But here it is, and it already is that, and we already are that. So it's a fait accompli.
So we as an individual are not having a hand in it. We're just experiencing whatever we experience.
Sure. Well, maybe we are doing it all, but even if that's so, it's already the case, and it's not a separate self or a psychological self or an ego that's doing anything. But we are that is doing everything. So in a profound sense, perhaps we are doing everything. But it's not we, Peter Brown. It's me, this.
As we are manifestations of this limitless intelligence.
Right.
Do you think it matters as humans for us to, do you think the kind of life we live matters one way or another?
No, it doesn't matter at all to reality. It may matter to you personally, and if it does, you're free to try to maximize that aspect of things as best you can, as we all know.
See, I get kind of stuck on that point.
I'm not, tell me the conundrum, I don't see it.
Well, I suppose it's my little human ego likes to think that the kind of decisions and choices that I make about how to live my life and the kind of behaviors I may follow has some kind of meaning.
Well, it does have meaning. It has meaningfulness as being an aspect of the expression of the flavor of what you are. I mean, you know, you're like your very being is like an art form. Well, you're an artist, so your being, you understand that your being is like your entire life, your entire you-ness is like an art form that captures a profound, rich flavor and evocative meaning, even if it's not particularly precisely definable or stateable, nonetheless it's there. And every aspect of what you are and what you do reflects that. So it's definitely meaningful, but not meaningful in the sense of achieving anything. It's meaningful for being what it is. Like a beautiful plant. It's meaningful for being what it is, and it has beauty in it, you know. It's not like, oh, it has to be there or the world's a better place for it being there. It's just nice.
I just wonder, as I'm human, I have these concepts, you see. And I have this concept of this limitless intelligence, which I think I've said before, I see as a very loving soul energy.
Right.
That somehow our manifestation, physical form,
Right.
is as conscious. You often say consciousness kind of plays with itself. Right. Consciousness is playing with this manifestation, saying, let's see how well humans can express this consciousness that has no description, right?
Right.
How well they can manifest it in their lives, so that.
Right.
Again, that's my little human concept, because that to me gives sort of meaning, and it makes sort of a sense of it all.
Right.
Otherwise, it just seems very random. You know, oh, let's just throw this around here and throw this around there. Oh, look at what that block's doing, and this block's doing that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a little of both. I think you're oversimplifying it a bit. I think it's less like an intelligence test or a, you know, to see how well you can do kind of a thing, where there's a doing it well versus a doing it less well. But I do think that what you do in your intimate participation and engagement and caring about your own functioning is a direct expression of the inherent intelligence and is very meaningful as that. And so I think that it is the way you think it is, but it's not in the sense of a value system of doing it better versus worse, or successfully versus failing, or, you know, in other words, I think it's less of an experiment and more of a celebration. But I think it's very much that. I think what you do is, I think everything is profound and intimately engaged and integrated with the meaningfulness of what is going on here. I mean, and the scope of what's happening here is completely beyond the human level. There's no way you can say what's happening. Why is this occurring? What's it doing? Where's it going? What's its inherent purpose or motivation or whatever? Even if that was even remotely applicable, it's not addressable from a human context. But but it's certainly true, I think, that everything is a profoundly meaningful, direct expression of this supreme intelligence. And it's not just that you are an expression of that intelligence, you are actually that intelligence as well. Because the expression, I mean, you as a human being is like a character in a dream. But when you dream yourself in a dream, the you that's appearing in the dream is not you, that's a dream character. But the you that's dreaming it is the real you, and the real you that's dreaming it is dreaming itself as the dream character. So in a profound sense, they're continuous. They're one and the same. So even if you are a creation of the inherent intelligence, you also are that inherent intelligence. You know, it's a continuum, it's a continuity. But I do think there's absolute profundity and meaningfulness in every aspect of what happens, but not in a simplistic sense that can even vaguely be gotten the handle on as in doing it well or not. But by all means, do it well. You know, if you're motivated to do the best you can, by all means, hey, why not? It's a beautiful thing. In its own light, whether or not whatever it is on a universal scope. But I think that there is, I think nothing is trivial. I think everything is absolutely profound, and there's no hierarchy of, oh, this matters and this over here doesn't. I think on the contrary, every detail of everything is an absolute intimate expression of reality itself, which is why, what I call noticing, this whole technique of exploring this and settling into this is so easy, because it doesn't matter where you do it. You can look at a silly smudge on the wall and discover the absolute depth of reality there just as much as, looking at a saint or the sunset or whatever. There's no hierarchy of, more or less important, more or less real.
So I don't know how to ask this question, but so there's, so I see a person on the street, they're mentally ill, or I see a person on the street, they're homeless.
Right.
It's clear, it's very evident.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to ask the question, but you were just saying that everything is meaningful, and I guess it sounds stupid the way I'm going to say it, but I want to have a way to understand that, and I don't even know if that's even the right question.
Well, their meaningfulness is what they are to you, for you, and their meaningfulness to themselves is something that you can't ever really know or participate very directly. So in other words, the meaningfulness that anyone has to you is what they are in your life. If you drive by a homeless person on the street and you've never seen them before, and you drive by and there they are, and you see them, and you get some sense of them, and then you're gone and then you never see them again, then that's what they mean to you. It's that everything that's in that. And you can't quantify that or say what it is, right? Because that snippet of experience is incredibly dense and profound in terms of all the subtleties that it embodies and conveys. But that's the whole, for you, that's the whole shooting match. Right?
Well, I mean,
And you're qualifying them as homeless or mentally ill or something, but that's a very trivial qualification. They are a multidimensional presence of all sorts of qualities that transcends any of your sort of pigeonholing them as being this or that.
Huh.
Again, it doesn't negate the way you categorize them. It just means there's a whole lot more that's there, and meaningfulness is in the totality, not just in your conscious version of it.
Yeah, that all gets missed. I'm just realizing sitting here that with that pigeonhole,
Sure.
anything else.
Yeah. This is what we've been talking about all day. This is the
Where am I?
interpretive framework versus actual experience. Interpretation creates a caricature, a stick figure of what's actually present.
Yeah.
Whereas any actual experience, glancing at something, walking past something, thinking of something momentarily, is a multidimensional, information-rich, information-dense
Wow.
presentation, which just has universes of profundity and meaningfulness.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of amazing in this moment, because, yeah, I do. I have this framework, and then the
Well,
framework
it's very normal. We're all familiar with
creates,
that.
a feeling like, wow, that must be really hard. Just all this.
Sure, but all of that reaction is to your own story, which is triggered by the stimulus, but doesn't include the fullness of what's actually there.
I'm seeing that. It's blowing my mind. Thank you. That really.
Isn't a question in itself a doubt? Because when, at least in my experience, when I feel like I see, then there's not a single question arises. There's just this surety about that it is, and all directions. Yeah. So a question is a doubt, basically.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, at best, a question is an invitation to look deeper, and at worst, a question is looking for a simplicity to close the door to looking deeper. You know, you ask a question either to get a simple answer so you can pigeonhole the whole thing, or if you're wiser, you ask a question to invite yourself to direct attention to greater fullness.
I like to ask that second version of the
That's what we're going for here.
which is consciousness. I've just used that word because that's easy for me. Is playing out as it is,
Sure. Yeah.
whether we recognize it or not.
Yes.
Yet, if we recognize, if consciousness recognizes itself,
Yes.
there is some shift.
Yes. That's the whole shooting match right there. The entire day, this talk was in that one sentence.
Did you say it again?
No, I can't say it. Okay, it's been recorded. You can download it off the internet in a couple of weeks when I get around to posting it.
Peter, I had a question in my own experience of the metaphor of sinking into the hot tub or noticing.
Mhm.
And I notice, sometimes I'll notice, which I've never noticed before, and maybe it's just something to play with, but zinginess, kind of energetic, I don't know, in the body.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that is. We should talk about that.
You can't know what it is. When you start to open to noticing, you begin to experience all sorts of novel or perhaps previously unrecognized little energy phenomena that are unclassifiable, you know, which is no surprise. Actually, everything's unclassifiable, but these things are explicitly so. And all sorts of things can happen, yeah, all sorts of energy can happen. I mean, no doubt you've heard tell of all the sort of fables, Kundalini awakening symptoms and all that kind of stuff is for real. All those kinds of things can happen. And, you know, when one begins to open to this, in a way it's provocative. You're, you know, just the opening to it is inviting and essentially provoking a more rapid energy shift in the way you're holding yourself. And this can show up as all sorts of little symptoms. It can show up as physical symptoms, it can show up as health symptoms, it can show up as psychological symptoms, it can show up as you know, these subtle weird energy phenomena symptoms. It can show up as weird karmic symptoms like synchronicities, weird things, you know, happening, weird alignments happening in the so-called objective world that are like, wait a minute, what's this? What's going on here? You know, anything can happen, and these things become, you can definitely tend to sort of cascade or snowball noticeably when you begin to settle into more powerful noticing.
I sense inside me though, it's almost I don't know, you know, the mind is still looking for those pointers. Oh, so now there's a subtle, like, almost like when something like that happens, oh, I'm on the right track. You know,
Yeah, that's very typical. Nothing to worry about. The mind is always trying to get a handle on things. But again, you know, you're kind of doing two things at once in the mind. So the mind is sitting there doing its thing, and don't fight it. It's not like that's a problem. Just let it go. But at the same time, you know, when you do engaging with direct experience, that is happening directly, bypassing the mind. It's not against the mind, but it's like something happening here and something happening here. They just are sort of happening on two levels. So it's unimportant. You don't need to suppress that or worry about it. The mind can even be watching this and saying, hey, what the fuck? What's going on here? You know, or whatever. It just doesn't, it's not important. Because the mind eventually will be in awe of the stuff that's going on, and it'll be going, wow, this is really cool. I mean, you know, I didn't get into this because it has a lot of sort of theoretical implications and is essentially unimportant, but a very meaningful way to paradigm to sort of see this in terms of all of this stuff is like subtle energy reorientation. You know, the theory that you are, what you are is, could be defined as being a transcendental structure of subtle energy, whatever that means, ignoring for the moment what that actually means. And that, you've heard of the chakra system and all of these kinds of things. So that kind of a map is actually very directly relevant to what we're talking about here. And basically, being with your experience in various ways is kind of like this energy system, this subtle energy system orienting to itself according to, let's say, certain internal circuitry. And so when you begin to shift that, when you begin to be with your experience in different ways, it's actually, and essentially, rewiring or shifting the normal circuitries of the way your subtle energy system is being with itself, which of course has it's like a tower of sticks. You pull out one stick and the whole thing rearranges itself. So all these kinds of symptoms can seem to show up, and it's quite coherent to see them in terms of this kind of a model. That makes perfect sense. But it's not particularly, that's not necessarily true or important. So, and it it has a whole sort of a lot of its own theoretical implications. So it's not really anything, but it's interesting to note that that is actually a very coherent paradigm to see all this stuff in terms of.
I was just wondering if there was something, if it was just noticing the body, and I guess it's that too.
Well, it's both. On one sense, through noticing and increased sensitivity, spontaneously it shows up. In other words, your sensitivity to finer experiential phenomena really magnifies them. So these subtle things which you might not have even noticed before, they might not have crossed your threshold of awareness, can sort of be more apparent. Or maybe that also you're shifting your own orientation has repercussions, because the hip bone is connected to the thigh bone, and when you reorient any part of the way you are, it's liable to to recalibrate the whole system to some extent.
Peter, when you talk about recalibrate, that reminds me of something where you mentioned one time where you may reach a new threshold of experience, and it seems so amazing to you, and you're just like in awe, and then it goes away, and one might think, oh, I've lost it. I often mention that as sort of like it's all recalibrating itself, and it becomes more the new norm.
Yes, very much so, very much so. I mean, normalcy always catches up with you. No matter how far out you get, it will seem normal when you've been hanging out there for a while.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is a people who are engaged in hardcore spiritual unfoldment notice this phenomenon all the time.
Yeah.
It's like, God, I'm completely transformed, but here I am, I'm just me, and it's just normal, and it's another Saturday, But if I can look at my frame of mind now, my experience now, and compare it to what my sort of normal frame of mind was 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, I would go, wow,
yeah,
this is a whole different kettle of fish. But somehow it doesn't feel like that, because it sort of becomes the new normal. And this is, it's interesting, the system does sort of tend to recalibrate itself. And so whatever it seems to be more or less the way, the sort of the default, the range of default sort of feels normal after a while. And we all experience this, when we were teenagers, we felt normal, and now we're us feeling normal. But if you look at your frame of mind now and your frame of mind when you're a teenager, it's like, what? I wasn't even the same person. Yeah, the psyche is very flexible, and sort of it sort of resets itself, with amazing flexibility and power, just sort of automatically.
Yeah, I've been keeping a journal for about 4 years.
Oh yeah, that's a good.
Sometimes I go back and read some of the stuff and say, well, that's when I see that. What a change, because I used to actually believe that.
We were talking a little earlier about the issue of things coming up that were, problems or I don't remember how you put it, things coming up that were, that were out of, that were disruptive. And in the same context of what we were just talking about with different sort of symptoms coming up, that's another thing that can happen, you know, when we begin to reorient towards our experience, there can be all sorts of symptoms come up. Many of them can seem very disruptive. They aren't always necessarily benign, like little curious tingles or something. It can be all sorts of stuff. It can be, you know, major health issues can come up, or major karmic things can come up, or your house can catch fire, or things like that. And you know, but this is part and parcel of the nature of this doing its thing, and none of it makes any sense, so you can never figure out what's happening or what's what and what's it all about. But that's always the case, so there's no surprise there. But it's very noticeable and it's very palpable. You know, I've been around a lot of people who have sort of delved into this stuff and begin to sort of live it more deeply, and you know, the shit can fly. But it's actually a good sign.
So there's a difference between watching the shit fly versus flying with the shit. This is a or watch.
It's all good. It teaches you.
We talked about talking in terms of chakras and kundalini rising.
Yes.
In those systems, the way you perceive reality depends on through which chakra you're functioning and how high your kundalini can fluctuate.
Right.
So there's more to it than just relaxing. It also depends on the kundalini, how high it is and stuff.
That's right.
Can perceive.
Yes. But the way to engage with that, what all of that looks like is what we think of as being our experience. Mm-hmm. So, you know, the subtle energy system with the chakras and all that, as an actuality, it's sort of like a movie projector. And the movie that it's projecting is what we think of as being our experience in our life. So when we're engaging with the movie, we're actually engaging with this subtle energy system. So the way we orient with our experience actually has repercussions with the way we are with our energy system. And this is why this kind of relatively simple experiential exercise can have a profound effect on our internal energy, because our being with our experience is actually the way that the subtle energy system is with itself. So it reorganizes, it restructures the energy system, the so-called kundalini, and that straightens itself out, so to speak, or organizes itself. It's a self-organizing kind of a system. And once it gets started, it has a tendency to flower as its own internal, momentum or something. I mean, and again, it's sort of a model to see it in those terms, but I think that that's a pretty profound and powerful model in many ways, and it's quite applicable. Although, like with anything, I would take it with a grain of salt. But this is not a theory. This is real. This is actual. And so that's why, you know, bottom line, be with this. and you don't need to rely on any theory. You know, it doesn't matter whether it's subtle energy or kundalini or spiritual or just whatever, but still in all, you're being with reality by being with this, and that's got to be a good thing. You know, that's the bottom. That's the rubber meeting the road. Is this right here, and all of this other stuff. You know, how you're parsing it or explaining it or rationalizing it is all just pie in the sky anyway. So who cares? But actuality is powerful. Actuality is intrinsically potent because it's real. Realness is power. You know, I mean, the thought of someone punching you in the face and someone actually punching you in the face is a very different experience because of the reality of the actual punch. So actuality has potency, and simply being with the actuality of experience, you know, in a hopefully a less aggressive manner, has similar potency, has similar, you know, intrinsic sort of oomph factor that in my experience proves itself to be just that, powerful. Gosh, that sounded an awful lot like a closing speech. So why don't we knock off? I can't go anywhere That was such great closing words. I painted myself into a corner.
Thanks for coming up.
Anyway, yeah, thank you very much for coming. It's a pleasure to see you.